Happy New Year. I've been waiting since March to say that. 2020 was just a terrible year. I mean, when you look at all that happened with the pandemic and the political craziness and the economic uncertainty, the racial unrest, and now we're in a new year, and we all hope that it's going to be a better year. But let me tell you, everything is not going to be perfect this year. I mean, you're still going to have difficulties because we live in a fallen world. So I'm going to talk briefly about how you can have the best year ever by discovering God's purpose for your life. And I know you've probably heard that phrase before, but I want to talk about it a little bit differently because God has a plan for you. He's got a purpose for you. And a purpose is having a clear mental picture of what you're to do and who you're to do it for while you're on this planet. And God has that for you. And you find that through a God encounter where you begin to have an experience with hearing Him speak to you. And I'll tell you how in a minute. And we're going to look today in John chapter 4 for a lady that really had a terrible background. She had several strikes against her. She had a bad reputation. Everybody in town knew that she was a husband stealer and a cougar and all those things. She had a lot of shame. I mean, she went to the well at lunch like you would go to Walmart at midnight so she wouldn't have to run into anybody that made her feel guilty, maybe somebody's wife, ex-wife. And so she had all that going against her. And she was just a lady that, man, every decision she made, it seemed to be a decision that would take her farther and farther in the wrong direction. She hid behind religion. A lot of people do that. She said, I'm from Samaria. We worship over here. I'm Baptist, so we do this. I'm Catholic or I'm charismatic. And all those things were things that really kept her from being in a position to find God's purpose for her life. She was stuck in bad decisions. And the reason she is her purpose was real simple. She wanted to find a man that would fulfill her and meet all of her needs. Now, I don't know where you are today, if you're dating or you're looking for a husband or a wife, or if you're married and frustrated, but there is no human being that can meet your deepest needs and fulfill you. And Jesus he reveals that to this lady in John chapter 4. The big picture is this year, you can have a God encounter that can change your life and you can find your purpose. That's kind of the bottom line. Look for a God encounter where you can find your purpose. And she had that with Jesus. Now, there's four ways God reveals Himself to you and revealed Himself to her, Sally from Sychar. And the first is where you're reading the words of God that were written to you. And in the rawest form, that's what was happening here. Jesus was quoting from Isaiah and Jeremiah, talking about living water, talking about not having wells that were dry, and looking for your heart to be filled with things that couldn't fill you because they're natural and not spiritual. And so she's actually hearing the words of God, and you can do that. That's why we have the reading plan. That's why we have the downloadables for the 9-minute message and all the things to help you, devotions. But this year, if you want to find God's purpose for your life, you got to have a conversation with Him, got to hear from Him, and then have a conversation with Him. And that's what she's doing. Prayer is nothing more than talking to God and listening to God. And that's what was happening with Sally. She was actually having a conversation. He said, well, I don't believe in God. Well, she didn't know it was Jesus. She didn't believe He was the Messiah. But through a conversation with Him, she began to realize that this man was different. So this year, I just challenge you that one of the ways you find God's purpose is to read His words to you and have a conversation with Him and be open to godly guidance. I think that's one way that we all struggle, is that we'll have somebody that we really respect. Maybe he's not a great person. Maybe didn't have a godly life, but they've got this or they've got that. And so we're open to hearing from them when the people we need to be hearing from are people who are godly. And Jesus begins to speak into her life, and she begins to realize He's different. This is a godly man. And she takes that information and she goes into her town, the town of Sychar, and she has been a Christian now for 5 minutes. but now she's become the godly counsel. That's what's so cool about Christianity. You know, you take what you have and you begin to give that to other people, and it changes them. And her whole town came out to meet the Messiah. And they said, hey, first we believed because of her testimony, but now we believe because we hear you and we know that you're the Messiah, the Son of God. But the fourth way you can find your purpose and hear from God is see your difficulties as a way to learn and to grow. Now, I want to be careful here because a lot of you are like, hey, man, I've heard that before. That's the reason I quit going to church. You know, the preacher told me God was punishing me. The preacher told me it was God's will that my baby died. The preacher told me that, you know, if I had more faith. Listen, all that's just wrong. That's not biblical. Jesus took all of your punishment out on Jesus if you're a believer. He's not out to get you anymore. He's not out to hurt you. Now, your choices have consequences. I'm not saying that. But God's not out to hurt you. He's out to love you and to help you. And a lot of you, you're like, hey, I don't know about that. If I don't have enough faith. Well, the Bible says if you have faith the size of a mustard seed in a great God, great things can happen. See, Sally's difficulties came because her life purpose was terrible. I'm going to find a man who's going to fulfill me and meet all my needs. And until she had a God encounter with Jesus, that purpose couldn't change. So this year, I want to challenge you to do that. I mean, when they began to have this conversation, she realized, hey, this is the Son of God. I mean, he entered into a covenant relationship with her that changed her. You say, well, how can I know that I've had a God moment? Well, you'll leave your bucket. You'll leave all your control. You'll be willing to change your plans. You'll be willing to do things differently. You'll be willing to pivot. You'll allow interruptions in your life. Listen, when you do that, when you're sensitive to the presence of God in your life, not just at church, at house church, but every day, God can lead you on a better path. Listen, difficulties, when you understand your purpose, difficulties can be the very thing God uses to deliver you to a much better path and a much better life. You say, well, hey, you know, I'm not sure I understand all that. Listen, you don't have to understand everything that God is saying to you to be willing to change. Let me tell you about Sally. I went and did some study about the woman at the well. And legend has it, historians say that Jesus went to her town for 2 days. And in that time, she was baptized, and a lot of the people in the town were baptized, and her name was changed to Photine, which means a light. It means effervescent. It means glowing. And she became an evangelist. She began to share her message of Jesus and the man that she met all over that area, to the point Nero found out who she was and had her tortured and threw her into a well. And we know that the well couldn't have been dry because she was filled with living water that she found in Jesus Christ. So here's the bottom line. God's with you this year. He wants you to have a God moment. You got to be open to those interruptions that come into your life where God can say, hey, this is the direction I want you to go. You got to be willing to change. The Bible says in Colossians 3:23, maybe this could be your verse for 2021. Whatever you do it with all your heart as unto the Lord, not unto man. And when you do that, you'll be given a great reward. God bless you, and I'm praying for God moments all year long in 2021.